Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast. We are less than 2 weeks from the election. We are spread out around the country. I don't know if Mike Madrid's in the south of France, but he's definitely not in his man cave in Sacramento. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm on the East Coast today. I was mentioning to everybody how easy it is to do this podcast from the East Coast because it's at a more civilized time. Usually feeling a little bit barbaric. Got to get up at 7 a.m. and get a cup of coffee going to keep up mentally with Chuck Rocha, which is difficult. It's a challenge, an intellectual challenge to keep up with Chuck.
No, it's just physically hard to keep up with me. Mentally, it's really a slow walk. Look, everybody, we're super happy today to be joined by a special guest. Carlos Eduardo Espina is a good friend of ours. He's a friend of our staff's. And look, we talked a lot about social influencers, social media, and the way that the new generation of Latinos are consuming information. Me and Mike Madrid came up in politics where when you bought TV commercials, you could talk to every Latino that you needed to because there was just 3 TV commercials and only one of them were in Spanish. The days have changed. And what Carlos has done is really have a big following on social media. He is literally a social media influencer. Now, I know a lot of you think that Mike Madrid is a Twitter influencer. He is a Twitter fighter, not an influencer. There's a difference that Carlos is going to explain to us. But Carlos, thanks so much and welcome to the program.
No, thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here.
Look, let's dive right into this. And then, Mike, we'll kind of go back and forth with the questions. I'll start by, before you tell us about the social medias and the internets and all the ticks and the talks, maybe you could tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, your family, and things like that.
Yeah, so my mom's from Mexico, my dad's from Uruguay, and I was born in Uruguay but came to the United States when I was 5 years old, and I grew up in College Station, Texas. So then I did all of school, high school, graduated, went to undergraduate at Vassar College in New York, and then I went to law school in Las Vegas, and I just graduated in May. And obviously there's a lot of stories in between there, but that's just kind of like the quick and easy 30-second recap of my story.
That's awesome, Mike.
Well, I just wanted to say, Carlos, welcome to the show. And we talk and have been talking for a long time about how younger Latinos over-index, as we say. They're disproportionately watching social media channels because we're a younger. When I say we, I'm trying to join your young club here.
Me and you, Carlos.
We're a younger community, and you have an audience of many, many thousands. We'll get to the exact numbers in just a little bit, but you're also cutting edge on the types of issues that you talk about. Some are political directly, some are a little bit more cultural as an entree rather to getting people to be more politically motivated and focused on what they should be focused on as a younger generation. Talk to us about how you got onto social media, where you're primarily living on social media, and what it's meant for you in terms of your advocacy.
Yeah, for sure. So like I mentioned, I grew up in College Station, Texas, and my advocacy really started when I was in high school. I became passionate about politics because of Bernie Sanders. So that's how I know Chuck and the work you've done. But yeah, I remember I was in high school and at that time, Trump was saying all these things about immigrants. And I was like, well, I don't like this guy, but I don't really know what I do like. So then I saw another guy, it was Bernie Sanders. He popped up on my Facebook feed. I think it was like an ad or something. And I was like, hey, I kind of like this guy. So I started, looking into it, and I started, connecting the dots with like a lot of the problems that I was seeing in my community that I grew up thinking were normal, like, people getting deported or all these kinds of things. And then I was like, there's like a political, context to this. These are political decisions that are being made. So throughout high school, I started getting interested in that. And then that branched out to, how can I do community work? So during high school, I started teaching citizenship classes, tutoring in English, and I just became really passionate about it. In college, I decided, hey, I want to study political science. This is what I want to do. And once I graduate, I want to work in a nonprofit organization and just help others. And it was going pretty well. I graduated college in May of 2020. And then that's when the pandemic came. And then I was like, oh, well, all the plans that I had, now they go out the window. So the nonprofit organization that I wanted to work with, we weren't able to make it work because they lost funding because of COVID. And then, just moving cities during the pandemic, and everything became really difficult. So while I was at home, I was like, well, what can I do now? I want to keep helping, but everything that I know how to do is like out the window. And then a nonprofit that I used to volunteer with teaching citizenship classes, they reached out and they were like, "Hey, Carlos, you're like the only young volunteer we have. Maybe you know a little bit about social media. Would you be interested in helping us teach the classes online?" I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." And I started doing them on Facebook. And then someone was like, "You should do the same thing, but on TikTok." And I was like, "Why would I do it on TikTok? You know, TikTok is just for dancing and singing." And I had like this misconception about TikTok. But I thought about it. I was like, well, yeah, maybe, if I don't like what I'm seeing on TikTok, it's because there's no one like me on TikTok. So why don't I make the content? So my very first videos in early 2020 were about citizenship. It was 100 questions, all in Spanish. Hey, if you want to become a US citizen, this is what you need to know. And it just started blowing up overnight. I mean, within a week, I had 10,000 followers. Within a month, I had 40,000. And by the end of 2020, I had over 500,000 followers. And I was like, wow, this is like huge. I mean, I was already doing this work. So it just became me like, hey, today I want to teach y'all about this or share this or, analyze this political position that Biden has or that Trump has, everything related to immigration advocacy. And I really found, that there was a need and a desire among the people for this kind of short form content related to immigration, to politics, to social issues. And yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for almost or a little bit over 4 years now. And I currently have 10.5 million followers on TikTok, 2 million followers on Facebook, and around a million on Instagram. And I'm sharing 5 to 10 videos a day about everything from politics to immigration to news. But yeah, it's been a wild ride.
That's really impressive. Wow.
Yeah. Let me jump in real quick. Yeah, that's a little bit shocking, but it makes perfect sense. Where can people find you really quickly before we get a little bit more deeper into this? Where can people find you on TikTok?
It's just my name, Carlos Eduardo Espina, on every platform.
Okay.
That's awesome. And so when people hear about this growth, I've got two questions. One is, politicians come to us or come to me or other consultants and be like, how do we grow our social media content and how do we get more followers and people paying attention? It sounds like you felt the niche of something that wasn't happening on the internet. And that's what really helped you. I want you to give me your explanation of why you think the growth was so quick.
Yeah.
And the second thing is this what you do now, Carlos? Is this your job? Is like you have sponsors or organizations or people who, because you have this influence now, will pay you to do whatever you're doing on social media? So is that a job now on, TikTok and other social media platforms?
Yeah, so the first question, I guess, there's a lot of factors. I think one of it was really the moment, I saw an opportunity. Everyone was at home during the pandemic. Everyone's online. And I think was a huge moment for TikTok where people started really getting on the platform. And it's funny because I remember in early 2020 when I started making my content, I started calling up friends that I have that are journalists. And I was like, hey, y'all need to be on TikTok. And they're like, oh, we're not going to waste our time. And then a year later, they were calling me. They're like, hey, about that TikTok thing, like, how does that work again? So it was like, one of it was the moment. I was kind of the first, person who was providing informational content for Latinos here in the United States. So I kind of grew unparalleled for a year. And once you reach a certain, following, it becomes easier to then keep going viral because you already have your followers. The second is I think I really found the way to message to people and meet them where they're at. So almost all my content is in Spanish. So it's very focused on Latinos, first generation, second generation here, but also, the language. So I was like, I have this understanding I have a political science degree. I was in law school at that time. So I understand these legal concepts, but the average person doesn't. So like when USCIS puts out this memo and it's very complex and legal jargon, I can break it down and, give you a quick summary in 30 seconds. And people found really that use. And I think that's the third point. The most important thing is a lot of people want to grow on social media without providing anything of value. And that's what I found is always the key. Every video that I make, I think, what is someone going to learn from this, or what are they going to get out of it that can help them in their daily life, whether it be information, whether it be a tool, whether it be in the case of citizenship information. But I think once you provide something to people, it becomes really powerful because then they're like, oh, this is someone, who's actually helping me out. And then so when you ask for help in return or whatever it may be, or for followers, whatever, it comes naturally. So it's not like, hey, give, or take, you're giving, taking, etc. Now, the second thing is in my job, it was my hobby for like 2 years. And then around like early 2022, late 2021, That's when I started getting to a point where I could monetize on social media. And there really is, like, I guess, three main ways to monetize. The first one is just like the video views, like every platform, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you get like 1 million views, they'll pay you, I don't know, a certain amount. Just depends on like the type of content and all that. So that's like the first. The second is like collaborations, like you mentioned. So for example, last night I did a live stream with an immigration attorney that I've been working with for almost 3 years now. So we'll do like live streams, answer questions, and we'll do like content and that kind of stuff. And it's just like a basically paid promotion. You can do it the same with like brands, clothing brands, all that kind of stuff. There's no end to it. There's just really depends. You never know what you're going to get in your inbox. And then the third thing is, I guess finding something that you like, whether it be merch or whatever. So I sell like my t-shirts, hats, and that kind of stuff. And then obviously people who really support me will buy that kind of stuff. But yeah, now thankfully it is my job, but I don't really see it that way because it's always been like a hobby, a passion for me that I've been able to turn into a job.
Well, Carlos, you're speaking directly to probably one of the prime audiences this year, this election year. Can you share with us what is on the mind of that Latino voter under 30 years of age, who maybe was kind of drawn to politics by Bernie Sanders, sort of an outsider message, maybe feels a little disaffected by the process, sees Trump and is kind of like, no, thanks. Yeah. Sees Kamala Harris and is kind of like, maybe. Like what are the messages? What's on the mind of the Latino voter under the age of 30?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I'm going to answer the question, but there is like a misconception about TikTok and social media in general. And based on my analytics I have on my end, 70% of my followers are my age or older, and I'm 25 years old, and I have a substantial following in like the 40, 50-year-old. I obviously have a substantial following in the under 30 as well, but it becomes really difficult because when I started making content, I was like, hey, this is going to be for young people. And then you get a bunch of, people my mom's age and my grandparents' age, watching my content. So when I make content, I kind of just make it for like a general audience. Sometimes I will be like, hey, if you're a young person or if you're an older person, but what I am sensing in a lot of young people is they really struggle, I guess, and I see it like in my friends, people I interact with, the comments I get on my videos, they really struggle to make the connections on like the struggles that they're facing day to day, how that is related to politics. And I think that's what Bernie Sanders was really good at, like, hey, you're struggling to pay rent, you're struggling to buy groceries, you're struggling to this. Well, all those issues are related to these political topics. And I think one of the mistakes perhaps that Democrats have made all across the board is a lot of times they try to tell, or give the perception that these problems don't exist or that they're exaggerated or that you're not really, the economy is not really struggling or this kind of stuff. And that becomes really difficult because the way young people see it is like, oh, it's just a bunch of, old people who are already in politics, who are millionaires telling us that, it's not that hard to buy a house or it's not that hard. Whereas I think it's really important to validate, hey, I know, yes, groceries are expensive. Yes, I know rent is expensive. Yes, I know it's almost impossible for you to buy a house, but the solution is not what Donald Trump and, his side are saying of deport millions of people and do all these crazy things. The solution is a more positive vision. And I think that's why when Bernie Sanders ran, his message resonated with so many young people like myself. And I still think that message is really what needs to be, hammered into the younger generations.
That's so eye-opening, and I think it is for so many people. When we do focus groups now, Carlos, it won't surprise you, but when we ask Latinos, where do you get your information from? A lot of it is, especially people under 40, is when they're online on social media. That's where they're getting, they're seeing things as the reason you got drawn into this. One of the biggest changes in today's politics is from 8 years ago is when folks used to search to find out Mike Madrid for Congress. They would leave their platform and go to Google and search. Now they're searching in platform, which is one of the biggest differences that I've seen over my 30 years of doing this work. My next question is, look, those of you listening at home know that I grew up in Tyler, Texas. It's just a few hours north of College Station, where Carlos is from. There's a different, I'm really curious about, like, College Station is not the Rio Grande Valley. Tyler, Texas is not San Antonio. There are Latinos there for sure, but I'm curious about your growing up in College Station and, the things that people hypothetically think they know about Texas. coming from, an immigrant background, being there, and now that you're online, have you had people, I guess I want to ask, come after you or be mean to you because of your immigration status or the things that you're doing? Or will you do have helpful tips for other people living what you're doing right now?
Yeah, well, I guess my immigration status has always been a privilege to me because it's a very complicated story. My parents were already living in the US. My dad was a US citizen, but my mom got deported in 1997. And then my dad would go visit her. She got pregnant with me. I was born outside the country, but I was born a US citizen. But my mom was undocumented. But then after like 5 years, she was able to come back to the US. It's like, and I guess it really highlights, everyone's like immigration or whatever story, family story is very unique. But one thing I did realize, like growing up in College Station, Texas, is I don't know. I feel like a lot of times, this like we see narratives in the media or on social media that we're a super divided nation and we're full of hate and all this, and obviously you do get a sense of that. But I did grow up in a pretty conservative community, and it wasn't until Donald Trump ran that I started realizing, I'm like, hey, there's a lot of people here who like don't like us, who I thought we were friends with. And like, I noticed a bit of that division. But within the Latino community, it's like a mostly Mexican American and more recent Central American. And I never like grew up like meeting like a Trump Latino for Trump. And then I started making content on social media, and I'm getting called like a socialist and a communist by some people in Florida. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'm just thinking we should like have access to healthcare. And like, I think this isn't really radical, but I did start to realize, that my perception of what Latinos were growing up, I was like, we're pretty chill. We just work hard when we're not like extremists and all this kind of stuff. And then I started like interacting with other, groups of Latinos in different states and from different countries. And I realized, how diverse it is. And that opened the door, like I said, to travel even within Texas. Like you said, the Rio Grande Valley. My girlfriend is from Donna, Texas. So she's from the Valley. And I've been there a couple of times. And one of the things I've realized is like, this blanket term of Latinos, obviously like it is useful when it comes to like, we have to have something to refer ourselves to, but it is really difficult to, pin down like one Latino identity. And we do have a lot of division, whether that be because of our first generation, second generation, third generation, whether it be because we're originally from Mexico or from Uruguay or from wherever it may be, or the state we live in. But one thing I have noticed, I guess, is that we do have a lot more that unites us than divides us. And I think that's when politicians really need to lean into when it talks about messaging and getting out. Like, yeah, we have a lot of, these divisions within our community, and I see them day in and day out. But at the end of the day, we have a lot more than unites us, and we really need to identify those factors and really lean in on them. And I think every Latino cares about the economy, they care about their family, they care about education, they care about having a good job and safety and some other topics too. Pero yeah.
That's awesome. Mike?
When are you going to run for office, Carlos?
So I spoke at the DNC, and now everyone keeps asking me that. I've always been a big proponent. Well, like I said, going back to kind of like this Bernie Sanders, I've always been attracted to like certain politicians, but not necessarily like a political party as a whole. Obviously, right now I understand the moment. Donald Trump is an imminent threat. That's why I voted the other day. I made a video. I voted Democrat up and down the ballot in Texas. But I've always believed, I feel like Latinos, and that's what we struggle with so much, is we don't fit in any box. These political parties, Democrats and Republicans, were created without us in mind. And that's not like because they willingly ignored us. Maybe they did, but like we just weren't, that big of an influence, I guess. Like, so I think politics is important. And I think, we need to be involved in politics, but sometimes I think, being on the outside and advocating and, marching, protesting, all that kind of stuff can also have as much of an impact as actually being in. Because once you're actually in, running for something, that detracts a lot from the time you have to do community work and do what I do on social media and that kind of stuff. So long story short, if it ever like it's a possibility, then we'll see. But right now, I think I'm able to impact and have a positive influence on millions of people's lives doing what I do from my house. And, it's really genuine, really, I get to connect with people and I enjoy doing that. And I want to keep doing it for as long as I can.
Well, that is awesome. Let me ask you one thing before we get out to the closing is like, let me put you in the strategist seat. And I think you probably see politicians and political parties, and every time you've opened your mouth, it's like a little focus group for Mike Madrid. It makes him so happy when you talk about all the things that you say, because it's just driving home things he talks about all the time around people that aren't wed to a party or to a politician and so on. But if you're the strategist and you're in the room and you are trying to give the politician advice when they're trying to reach this electorate on a platform like TikTok that is so widespread in our community, and folks use it second most probably to WhatsApp, what advice do you have for politicians in the way that they approach the video making? And like, if you're the not talking about, you should talk about Medicare for all, or you should talk about the billionaires and the millionaires, not that, but like this kind of the strategy behind what's the approach on social media, on TikTok and platforms like that to get your message out? What advice do you would have for the politicians?
I think the biggest thing is just being genuine, because I've noticed like a lot of politicians, like watching the content they put out, they try to like adopt like, some social, like, oh, let me try to act like I'm hip or I'm young or I understand. Like, you just have to be yourself. Like, for example, going back, and I know we keep relying back to Bernie Sanders, but I think he's really like a great example of someone who got it right. Like, who's this old guy? He's not, obviously he didn't grow up with social media, and, he's just sharing what he thinks, and people like that, So I think really being genuine when you're like a politician that people know, what you're like because they've seen you on television, and then you go on TikTok trying to act like you're all hip and young and all this. Like, it might work out if you're genuinely like that, but sometimes it seems very forced, and then the conversation becomes like, oh, you're trying to pander to young people, or you're trying to, you pander to whoever it may be. And so I think that really is the key, just whoever you are, whatever that may look like, whatever you care about, just share it in a genuine way. And then also I think politicians have this idea that like social media is very complex, where you have to like overthink everything. And like, for example, I made a video with President Biden when he announced the executive actions on immigration. And I was basically like, hey, we don't have to like, I'm just going to ask you a question and you just answer. Like, there's no like, how would I say, there's no like filter or like, oh, we have to edit this or that. Like, you just talk and people are going to like it because that's who you are. If you try to like, saying something like, just speak like you're speaking to anyone else. Don't think like, oh, I'm speaking to people on TikTok, because then that conditions the answers or the mentality that you have. So really just be yourself and don't overthink things. And at the end of the day, what matters on social media is just, I guess, the message and coming out across as genuine.
Yeah, again, as we're coming to a close here, first I want to thank you for your time again, Carlos, but I also want to really drive something home to our audience. First of all, make sure you're following Carlos Eduardo Espina. Follow him on basically any channel. You're going to find him. But you're 25 years old. You're looking to make an impact in the world. And I think back, it was a ways back when Chuck and I were 25. It's about time I was getting started in politics. And the difference here is so extraordinary because of the technology and the reach that you have. For us making that impact, one of the obvious choices was going into politics. Mm-hmm. You're saying, and I really want people to understand how profound this is, you can have as big or bigger of an impact doing what you're doing with millions and millions of people now, as opposed to running for office.
Yeah.
So running for office and even government involvement directly is, in many ways, it's a secondary consideration. You're having a bigger impact than most people are and can in elected office, especially at the age of 25. And so I just want to thank you for that perspective, not just for what you're doing, although that's extremely important, but for sharing that with other people and maybe helping change their perspective by realizing we can affect change. We can help our community. We can inform our people, and we can advocate on their behalf in a myriad of different ways, particularly with simply being genuine and driving a message forward. And I think your story is just incredible, and I really appreciate you being with us today.
Yeah, and I'd jump in there, Carlos, and ask one last thing, because I think it is relevant, because it came to me while we were sitting here. Do you think it would affect you? Because there's a chance these platforms go away. If they ban TikTok, or if they do something with Facebook or Instagram, with Congress, does that affect you?
Yeah, I think it affects me in the short term, right? Because people are going to be shocked. They won't be able where to find me. But I think after 4 years, and I really recognize this when I go out in public, like I've gotten to a point where like I can get banned and people still know me. Like I'll walk outside, like at any place where there's a lot of Latinos, and I'll have a line of people like, oh, I follow you on TikTok. Let's take a picture. Let's talk. So I think there would be like an adapting period where I'd be like, where can I reach people now? Because obviously you still have to maintain that connection, but I also have the privilege that I've been doing this for long enough that if that does happen, people won't forget about me. Yeah, I'll lose my millions of followers on TikTok, but I can try to find another way. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it does, there's always there's always
Have you ever interviewed or talked to a politician who supports banning TikTok but wants to be on TikTok with you?
Not necessarily, because the thing is, like, I don't really reach out to like politicians, and the stuff that I've done. I mean, it's not, how would I say? I have to. That's a good question. I'm gonna start every time I meet someone now. I'm like, before I talk to you, what's your position?
What position on fact? Now,
Yeah.
look, we've got a couple minutes left, so I want you to take us out. I'll just say I'm really happy you're here. I'm super excited about what you're doing. Your story is super inspirational. And this is what I want to end with: is that if you could talk to kids that are coming of age between 15 and 25 like you are, like what's the best tip that you have for them, not just on social media, but you've learned so many life lessons, you've been with the president of the United States, you spoke at the DNC, you get to do a lot of fancy shit, but what advice do you have for yourself 10 years ago that maybe some other young kid would take and get something out of?
Yeah, I think my advice would be like, you belong in these spaces. And what do I mean by that? The first time I ever went to the White House, I was like, oh shit, like everyone's in a suit, and what am I even doing here? And I started like hearing people speak, and then I started speaking, and I'm like, like I I can be here too, like that's what you go to school for. That's what you prepare yourself for. So I think there's like that shock when you're first like, I'm 25 years old and these people have been doing this for years. And then they start asking you questions and they're like, oh my God, like I'm like, wait, what? I thought you were like the main deal here. And now I'm like, I just think like a lot of times we really think like we don't belong, or we get shy around politicians or around like positions of power. We kind of bow our heads. And I say that because I would do that. I would be like, I'd get scared. I'd be like, yes, I try to like not make too much noise. But like if we are in these spaces, it is because we are the future of the country, and people realize that. And I think whatever you put your mind to, obviously you have to have some sort of preparation, whether that be like education or work or whatever area it may be, but you do belong in these spaces. And I mean, the future is ours, quite literally. So there does come a point where we have to start realizing like, hey, we have a say in this and we can change things, and we will change it because this is our future. So yeah, that's like my biggest advice. You can do it and you belong.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. You're an inspiration for all of us. You make me and Mike Madrid feel really old because we would have never been this prolific at 25 years old. Make sure to follow Carlos. He'll be in the show notes. So you'll know how to reach him by getting down and looking at our social media, because we're going to tag him in lots of stuff. And Carlos, thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for being with us today.
No, thank you very much, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Carlos.
What a great episode of the Latino Vote podcast this week, Mike. And now we have some additional special guests. This is our special guest episode. For those of you who've been following the program, last night was the big PBS documentary that was starring Mike Madrid, who took up way too much of my screen time last night. And they got to me way too late. But I still think a lot of people tuned in. Mike, did you get a chance to watch it?
Yeah, of course. They were focused a little bit more on beauty as opposed to substance. So
Jesus Lord, come on now.
That's why I got top billing there. But yeah, this is look. If you have not, we'll put this in the show notes too. But this documentary, I think, really captures the moments. PBS documentary called Voces Latino. It's about the diverse Latino community. I thought, how are they going to do this? How are they going to pull this all together in like an hour show? But the craft and art of filmmaking is something that I will forever be in awe of. It's a great show. Yeah, again, you and I are in this. Somehow we got past the security screening test, and they put us both in this thing. But we wanted to talk to some of the people whose brainchild this was and brought this to life. And so Without further ado, Chuck, do you want to introduce our guests today?
Yeah, Bernardo and Marcia are two of the folks who helped put this together with a larger team that I'm sure they'll get into. But we want to make sure we had some of the folks that help us put this together. And Bernardo, I think I'll kick it off to you. I know you better than Marcia, even though I know you just as good as him. Don't get me wrong. But kind of tell us how this whole thing came together, because as I was watching it, you came and you filmed me, and then you filmed Mike, and then you filmed us together. But then when I saw it, I was like, holy shit, he filmed everybody. He got in voices from Republicans and Democrats and nonprofits. So it was awesome. So tell me how it all came together, Bernardo.
Yeah. First of all, thank you both for being in the film. I genuinely think that your perspectives elevated it. Beauty and looks aside.
Thank you.
Listen, I think, anybody who knows PBS knows that historically, Latino producers, we've had to kind of fight for space on public broadcasting. And I say that as someone I made a film on Roberto Clemente. I made a film about Mexican-American winemakers. Marcia has worked at Frontline doing hardcore investigative broadcast journalism, but we've had to fight for our space. And, each time out, you kind of have to prove yourself and, reinvent the wheel each time. And I will say, very candidly, I think it's a frustrating process. I am seeing, though, that there is this growing interest in reaching Latino audiences, and I think this project was part of it. So I had done a film in 2020 during the pandemic that was called Latino Vote: Dispatches from the Battleground. Obviously, we were shooting in pandemic conditions. We got to film Chuck at the very beginning. This is about February, and during the Sanders campaign, we filmed that historic win in Nevada, and got to see, just the jubilance, the joy that people were experiencing there with the Sanders campaign. But that 2020 film did really well. It had like 1.8 million views in that first week or so. About 15% of those folks were Latinos, and based on that, I went back to PBS and I said, look, I'd like to do one on the 2024 vote, and immediately put together a team, with people who are smarter than me, like Marcia. And we wanted to cover as much ground as we could. We filmed in 8 states, a wide range of political opinions. And that was kind of our job, is how can we tell stories in as many places as possible to give us a robust view of how diverse this vote has always been.
And Marcia, give me a little background on the role you played and about how you feel like this came together.
Yeah, well, I just want to echo what Bernardo said. We're just so grateful that you guys were in this. Now that I'm doing some interviews, I'm just like, wow, you guys let us follow you around with cameras and a crew, because it is a lot. So thank you so much again for sharing your insights with us in this film. And yeah, I remember, one of the first calls I had with Bernardo when we were trying to figure out how this is all going to come together. He said very clearly, go for stories that are interesting to you. If we all find it interesting, then I'm sure, a national audience will find it interesting as well. And so that was really freeing to kind of go with that, go in that direction. And so one of the larger goals I had in mind was to kind of, well, first I'll say, Latinos are the second largest voting age population in the US. That doesn't mean that we're any more understood. News broke, I think, last presidential election cycle that we're diverse. And that's kind of as far as we've gotten. And I think one of the goals for me was to really show that diversity in this film in a nuanced way, which is why that we were able to cover 8 states. And it was just a great, pleasure to go to different states and cover Latinos in the Midwest who don't get a lot of coverage, or go to, parts of Pennsylvania where people don't really think of Latinos in Pennsylvania as having, big political power as Latinos in Miami or in Texas do. So that was one of my goals with this film, was to really just show the spectrum of diversity of the Latino electorate in the U.S.
I have a question, but I'm going to let Mike go first.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think one of the more fascinating characters was this young Latino, second generation son of immigrants, I think from Bakersfield or like from the Central Valley, California, who's a Trumper, right? And he's just estranged from his family. Can't really articulate like why he's a Trump guy, but it's clearly come at a really incredible personal cost to him. Um, and he just seems sort of more lost than anything else. Was it hard to find those stories, or maybe that one in particular, or how do you come across that? How does that work?
So our talented collaborator Andres Sediel, who's both a journalism professor and also a documentary maker, he's the one who put that story together. And I believe that was a collaboration with a local reporter, with the folks at the Fresno Bee. But I mean, that's an example of what Marcia was talking about, is with each one of those stories, we try very hard in the film to give dignity to each voice, and I've never been one of those filmmakers who wants to make films about people I agree with, A, because I think that's boring, and B, because I don't think that's informing anybody. Our job as journalists and filmmakers is to provide a snapshot of where the country is and where the electorate is. And that means, delving into some of these nuances. And I think all of us know or have experiences with folks who have really adopted some of the Trump style talking points. But we saw a lot of that with people who paid a kind of personal price in their in their family members who won't speak to them. In particular, in Jerry Reyes's case, and again, our colleague Andres Sediel produced that. You have, someone whose parents are really struggling with this young man's choice to call for closing up the border and supporting the mass deportations. And we also have Mayra Flores in the film, who, full-throatedly, as a Mexican-born former elected, is calling for the mass deportations of many of her country people. That conflict, as you all know better than anybody, you've been covering it, and participating in it, it's one of the contradictions or seeming contradictions in our community.
Well, Marcia, let me ask you this for those people who don't know, and that is, we got to see the final product last night that was simply beautiful. And it's hard to even keep up with all the places where y'all were filming and all these different faces around the country. The simple question is, how long does it take to make something that we watched last night? How long is that process?
Wow. Okay. So this was a pretty short turnaround for a documentary film of this scale and scope, I would say. Especially since we were covering the election. We had a deadline right around the time Biden dropped out of the race, and there was the assassination attempt on Trump, and we had to scramble last minute to redo some interviews, to reshuffle the edit, to make sure that the film was fresh by the time it aired last night. So there was a lot of reshuffling that happened. But I mean, Bernardo can speak to before my time, but I joined the project, I want to say, in end of January or early February. And I think Bernardo had already started filming in Florida by the time I got on, or very shortly after, with the Evangelicals. And then I started hitting the ground running with production, I want to say towards the end of February or early March. So somewhere between February and we delivered, not too long ago.
I think the big thing too is we don't have the resources of a New York Times or these bigger outlets. And this is just what we do is a lot like running a mom and pop restaurant. We are sweeping the floors, washing the dishes, making the food, tallying up the receipts, giving ourselves ulcers, making this thing gets done ethically, and on time. And listen, again, public media doesn't move at it's a changing system. It's embracing digital distribution methods, but there's still this broadcast infrastructure. So it's also just a challenging delivery process. So, I mean, I pitched this about a year ago, and it was about 7 or 8 months of production. But as Marcia mentioned, we have to be able to pivot to all of these changes in any election cycle. I mean, as you well covered, these, the Biden being pushed out or leaving the race, had big implications for how we put this thing together. And in our case, we're doing so on a real shoestring budget. We are not, one of these big, well-funded media operations. And for us, we're independents where, you crew up the ship, you make the film, and then you deliver, and you all go to work on other projects. So that it makes for a challenge. I do think what it does is it keeps us nimble.
The show is called Voces, Latino Vote 2024. It's on PBS. Came out just last night. So as you guys are listening to this, it's just going to have been out without in 48 hours. Everybody, you got to watch this. Like I'm getting a bunch of texts from people. Mickey Barra from the Iconic wrote me and saying, Mike, good job. It's great to see you. And you just kind of getting, the community seems to be rallying around this documentary because it is so well done. And I appreciate you sharing with us. Making a documentary is hard to begin with. You add the fact that you don't have the resources, that's 2. And then 3, this historic race with so many twists and turns where probably half the interviews you were talking about were under a different understanding with Biden in the race. And then I got a call too saying, we're gonna have to redo some of this interview stuff because it's not relevant anymore. We've got like 72 hours to do it. And I'm like, oh my God, like how are they pulling this stuff together? I will be with you guys on October 30th. In the Bay Area to doing some promotion. I know you had a great splash in Los Angeles. Again, people that weren't in the movie, weren't in the show from the community are kind of showing up. There's just, it's pulling people together. And I really am proud of how you guys were able to get such a broad range of voices to in an hour. Cut as cleanly and well with really rich characters and again with just the incredible changes going on in this race and here it is 2 weeks before the election. I was like, there's no way they're going to pull this off, but you did it. So I'm pleased. Will you consider doing another one, or is this it, guys? This is the last one.
I think Marcia is the future generation. My generation, Gen X, I'm like, I need a nap and some retirement savings,
Yeah.
You're speaking our language very much so. And we hope that you're going to have many, many more. It was really interesting to watch how all the different pieces came together and give you all a little behind the scenes, which Bernardo and the others may not want me to mention, but they recorded me twice. Mike, just so you know, I was the first interview because they wanted to start with somebody who could give them some knowledge of the Latino vote. So I gave them all the ins and outs of Joe Biden and how Joe Biden was going to win, and Joe Biden was not too old, and Joe Biden was full of life, and Joe Biden was the second coming of Cesar Chavez. And then all of a sudden, there was no Joe Biden. So we need to go back in, as they say in the business, Mike. We had to recut some things. And then I talk about how Kamala Harris was the second coming of Cesar Chavez, and now Kamala Harris is going to win. Anyway, I thought last night was really well done. Also, we're joined now by Andres. Andres, good to see you as well. Don't forget, if you're going to say something, to come off of mute. Tell us about what your role was in this big documentary that came out last night as well.
Good morning, everybody. I was one of the producers, was doing the stuff on the West Coast, so I had a chance to interview Mike a couple times because we had to redo his interview too. We did that nice scene with his friends down in Moore Park. Also, Pastor Sam in Sacramento, and I did a couple trips to Arizona. I got to hang out with Lucha. There was a good story about that. I don't know if you told that story yet. We'd originally gone down to Phoenix for this Grita, Canta y Vota event because we were going to film a concert of this young musician, Javi, who was going to perform at a big Phoenix high school, and we're going to try to get out the vote action there. But then the musician canceled right at the last minute. So that scene you see of us rushing to the Capitol and Gina from Lucha saying, hey, there's a vote happening right now. That was our backup. That was like, well, what else are we going to do? We have a crew here. And she's like, well, there's this thing going on at the Capitol. And we all jumped in the car and got that scene. So that worked out really well. be able to highlight reproductive rights in Arizona, which is such an important issue right now.
Can I ask, because I know Bernardo and Andres, you specifically, Marcia, maybe you as well, you've covered this topic before in previous documentaries. Is the feeling in the community, is the feeling on the ground different now than it was maybe 4 or 8 years ago?
I mean, it's such an interesting question. We've all covered the Latino community in many different ways, Andres through multiple front lines, and Marcia through many different projects. I will say one thing that I noticed that was very different from 2020. I think Marcia captured it best in there's a sequence in the film about a Puerto Rican woman, Joanna, who runs a cafe in the Midwest. And that piece stands out to me. And I've actually gotten a lot of messages about that piece because it's about a small business owner. And in her case, she's in Milwaukee. And she's just struggling to make ends meet. Like the math is just not adding up. So the price of ingredients, her inputs are very high, but she can't raise her prices because she'll lose her customers. And she's just kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place. And what's interesting about her, she's not a partisan. She's not like out there, working for one party or the other. She's just a small business owner who's like struggling to make ends meet. And I think that to me feels that's in sharper relief, that kind of economic despair that's really beyond any politics, and where, whatever happens, like those are the folks who need support and to be addressed. So for me, that feels like something, maybe it's a perennial. It's one of those things that lasts, that's always there, but you really feel it this way. And Mike, you said it in your interview as well. It's when the Democrats were painting a rosy picture of the economy, you are really alienating people like that. And we know that so many people within the Latino and Latina community are independent contractors, small business owners. And when they're suffering and there's a different, story being told about where the economy is, that's where there's like a real problem, a rift.
Yeah, you really captured that struggle well. You can see her just, she loves this place. She loves what she's bringing to the community. Her customer base loves it, feeling like it's a part of home in Puerto Rico. But she's just like, it's just math at a certain point. Like, it's just math. Like, again, there's no money to be made here. And to just keep the business open, let alone support my own, rent and mortgage and electric bill is very well done. Just powerful stuff, bringing up that working class struggle. So.
I think that me and Mike are asked to, Mike more than me, to comment on everything Latino Vote around the country, right? So I go into CNN, he goes into whatever studio. We've got a 5-minute segment on the Latino Vote and what's going on with the Latino Vote. And I think one thing that y'all proved that I think is what's so important as we started this, Bernardo, of talking about long form documentaries, which this is not even the longest form it could be. I know y'all consolidated a lot, is telling those stories of the diversity of the community. It's hard for me and Mike to make that in a 5-minute interview where we're debating somebody on the other side. And it's just about the top lines and the underperformance or the overperformance and what will this mean, blah, blah, blah. Digging down into real life stories, I think, is really where we have to go to next when we start looking at where this vote is happening. As I talk about this vote, I talk about it a little differently, and I talk about a maturing of the vote and how we're older, we've been here longer, second and third generation, and we're just starting to act different. Democrat, Republican, whatever. It's just the way different cultures have matured in America, right? And I think that was the piece in your film that touched me the most, was you looking at all the different sides of these long-form documentaries. Can one of you, and just jump in here, whichever one of you, because I don't know which one of you is an expert on this, but these stories cannot be big money makers for people. Probably that's why this thing is probably the way that you talked about, you having to do all this work, sweep the floor, make the meals. But I do think that this kind of long form entertainment, and I tip my hat to John Leguizamo, who's doing a lot of this as well, because it's these stories that starts connecting Latinos from different diasporas. So I think that that's really important. So can one of you talk about the future of documentaries there, or of any kind, but specifically the Latinos?
I'll jump in quickly about the diversity of our community, because even in our film, we couldn't get all the communities that were involved. And we realized all of a sudden, it was like, okay, well, wait a second. We didn't go to Georgia, or we didn't, talk to this community. So we also produced a series of digital shorts where we use those to be able to highlight some specific communities. One that also came out yesterday is about an Afro-Latina voter. Afro-Latinos make up about, I think it's somewhere around 8 or 10% of our community, and are growing. And, typically we did highlight folks from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico who have Afro descendants, but not specifically what it's on those folks' mind. And especially with Kamala Harris, a Black woman running, what does that mean for those multiple identities coming together? Another short we did has to do with an indigenous young man from Guatemala. So he comes here and he's labeled Latino, but his first language is Mom. He doesn't even speak Spanish, but he's also part of the Latino community, and asking him about those experiences. So there's so many multiple identities, we couldn't get to all of them, but that was definitely the challenge that we knew we were going up against. And then trying to use all these different forms of media to tell the stories, whether it's the hour-long documentary, the shorts online, trying to use social, because to answer your question, Chuck, about what the future is, the future has to be everywhere all the time in all forums. I think that's the best way to get it out there.
Before Mike has to jump, and I'm going to stay with you for a moment, Mike, do you want to do any last minute comment or question?
Yeah, I want to ask something a little bit more practical, because I think this film, for the first time, I've done a bunch of documentaries over the years that kind of talk about the size of the change and what's coming and what it means. And you guys obviously set up the movie with that. You have to do some of that, but then you really kind of take it to the next level and start telling the stories of what that means in a way that I have not seen a Latino Vote documentary ever do before. So I want to congratulate you on that. And part of that is this podcast has a really, really big community of people that want to elevate these stories and elevate these voices. What's the best way for people to engage with this and to share this and to help lift up the viewership of this movie?
I think two things. I mean, it's on YouTube, which is great. It's also, it's nice because it's transparent and you can actually see how many numbers it's racking up. So it's available on YouTube. You can share the link as well. And then also, it sounds kind of corny and cheesy, but people should contact their local public television stations in their markets and let them know that they like this program. That really matters. That matters to public television. It matters to the stations. It matters to us being able to do work like this. And I'll just very quickly riff on Chuck's question about kind of the future of public television documentaries and these kinds of independent documentaries. Look, these are only possible because we pay ourselves less than what happens in the commercial world. And I do commercial docs, and it's a very different ball game to do. So we all work for less, and they're only possible because of collaboration. So what Andres is talking about, all of us have relationships with other organizations and institutions. And I think these stories work best when we're able to collaborate across, that's how we were able to cover so much of this country. So I think that is really important, but it's a challenging time for journalism, as you know, and for media, and a potentially challenging time for PBS in the future. There are kind of many assaults on, public broadcasting. So it's something like telling these stories. It's something you have to fight for. And if people like it and want more of it and want to see it expanded, they really have to engage with PBS and say, this is working for us. We want to see more of this.
Well, that is really awesome. And I think that, our listenership is your sweet spot because we have so many journalists and so many Latino thought leaders and professors that are in. Thank you, Mike. Here listening to the show every single day. And what we're trying to do, and we talk about the lack of diversity in reporting, filmmaking, political, because I think it's all of our jobs. I think that's why it's really important for you to call your local PBS station. There's a reason why you should be tagging PBS in all the social media that you're doing to amplify the message of this, because it shows that as we grow, we need to be a bigger part of the budgets, a bigger part of the planning, and a bigger part of the executives that are making the decisions. It's no different than what I talk about every single day if there's not a Latino in the campaign, they don't know the cultural competency of what you're missing to talk about what the real power is of this community and whatever that thing may be. And it is telling those stories, and it's others. And so that's what I really liked about, being a part of this film, being a part of y'all's production, and being part of PBS. Like I've said to a lot of friends, it's my immediate circle of friends. That's where they're at. They're in public radio. They're listening to it every day because they're nerds. Like all of us are nerds, and we're beautiful brown nerds, but brown people can be nerds too. And that's what we're saying. It's okay. And so make sure that you watch this documentary. And I want to start with each one of you giving me an answer of what we're going to go Marcia, then Bernardo, and then Andreas. Tell me your one favorite part of making this documentary. Marcia, big question, go.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think my favorite part of making this documentary was something I said earlier, was just being able to spend time in Latino communities in places where I've never been before. Or hadn't spent much time with the Latino community there. So really understanding the context of Latinos in Wisconsin, for example, was really fascinating. They have a very long, deep, rich history. In the Midwest, which was just really incredible to see and to document. And like I mentioned, I spent time in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania too. And I walked into one local representative's office, and she had, I'm Dominican and we celebrate Carnival there. She had one of the big devils from the Carnival of my town in the Dominican Republic in her office, just standing next to her desk. So just seeing, different variations of Latino culture in places across the country where people don't think about Latinos being there, but we're there. We've been there for a long time, and we're making our presence known on the local political systems was just really great and really empowering to be able to document that.
Awesome. B?
Here. I mean, I'll say, two things. One is being able to work with this team. That's at the end of the day, the most deeply gratifying part of this process is work with really smart people. We don't all agree about everything. And I think as a result, that makes this work better. It elevates the work. Journalistically, and Andres and I have talked about this a lot. I'm really fascinated by how the Latino faith community is evolving and some of the political tensions there. So in our film, you see what's happening in Florida, some of the tension between evangelical leaders there, and how there's this growing immigration reform movement, even though in other areas they're very conservative. And so you see that even with some of the tension with Pastor Sam Rodriguez in California. So that to me felt like something we should be paying attention to. And I appreciate that we were able to get into some of the nuance of what the Latino evangelical vote looks like.
Yeah, I think, overall, what Bernardo is saying is it was really exciting to be part of a project of this scale at this time. So, if I'm over at the West Coast, I'm doing my shoots and I'm active in what I'm doing, to see what was happening in Pennsylvania, to see what's happening in Orlando, to realize that we were actually capturing this moment in what turns out to be such a critical issue for this presidential election. So it was really exciting to be part of that making of history. Specifically, I'm sad Mike jumped off. One of my favorite moments was when we were at the restaurant with his friends, because on one hand, it came about really organically. It was like after the interview, what are we going to do? Hey, you want to go talk to my friends? But it was also a concept that we had talked about filmically at the very beginning when we were trying to understand how Latinos engage with politics. And we all kind of looked at each other. It's like, okay, well, maybe I might be progressive, but I also have an undocumented cousin. I also have a Trumper cousin. I also have everybody has that in their family. And then everybody gets together at the dinner table or the carne asada or whatever. What does that dynamic look like? So trying to figure out how to tell that story and get together with my friends and seeing that people just talking about their lives was, it's always an honor to be with people to hear their stories. And so really feeling gratified about all the stories that were shared with us.
That was one of my favorite parts. I will say that now that Mike Madrid's not on here, but seeing his family get together at the restaurant, I like to give Mike a hard time because he's my brother when we're together, but that was really crazy. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And make sure that you check out the documentary Voices on PBS and make sure you share it with your friends. It came out live. We're recording this on Wednesday. It was live last night on the 22nd. You can share it anytime that you want to. Make sure that you're tagging PBS and all these great filmmakers. It was a labor of love by a lot of great Latinos. The thing that I think I appreciated the most is there wasn't a lot of well-intentioned white folks trying to make the Latino documentary. So again, we got the baby step things out of the way, but now get out there. It's our job to promote it. Thank you for so much. And thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Also, I want that shirt. I want that shirt. You got to tell me what
this is from the Howler Brothers collection down in Austin, Texas. The Howler Brothers shirt. That's the big roosters on the pearl snap Western shirt. And for those of you listening, don't forget to tune in. Don't forget to like us. Don't forget to share the podcast. Also, remember, if you're lucky enough to still have your mama with them, make sure you call your mama this week. And until next time, me and Mike Madrid and all of our guests here on PBS, we're out.